I got into my car and drove off, leaving Molly behind. She was probably sitting there in a daze, her mind racing with questions, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. I knew it wasn't easy for her, but I couldn't stay. The weight of what I had discovered was too much to bear. Tonight wasn't about confrontation or closure. It was about taking the first real step toward rebuilding my life, a life where she no longer had a place. As I drove through the quiet streets, the cool night air rushed in through the open window, and the steady hum of the engine became a backdrop to my thoughts. I needed to clear my mind, to find even the smallest semblance of peace in the midst of this storm. Everything I had known, everything I had trusted had crumbled beneath me, and now, I had no choice but to move forward. When I pulled up to Gabriel's house, the warm glow of the porch light was the first thing that greeted me. It was a small but comforting sight, a reminder that some places, some people, still carried a sense of home. The scent of freshly baked lasagna drifted through the air, wrapping around me like an embrace. Gabriel and Rose had always created a welcoming atmosphere, one that felt safe, steady, something I desperately needed tonight. As I stepped out of the car, Gabriel was already making his way toward me, his familiar grin easing some of the tension in my chest. He clapped me on the shoulder in his usual easygoing manner, though I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. "Good to see you, Mason. Come on in, make yourself at home," he said, his voice warm but laced with unspoken questions. Rose followed, extending a gentle hand. Her smile was soft, understanding. She didn't press, but her eyes held the quiet assurance that she knew I wasn't here for casual conversation. "You look like you've had a rough few days," she said, her voice soothing. "Come inside, let's get you fed." Their kindness was almost disarming. For a moment, I could pretend everything was normal. I could push aside the gnawing pain, the betrayal, the anger, and just exist in the warmth of their presence. Inside, the house smelled of home-cooked meals and fresh herbs, the kind of scents that made a place feel lived in, loved. I sat at the table, doing my best to keep the conversation light at first. I asked Gabriel about work, about the possibility of joining his team. I wanted to focus on something, anything that wasn't her. But as the night wore on, the facade began to crack. No matter how hard I tried to push it down, the emotions swirled inside me, restless and unrelenting. Rose, ever perceptive, noticed the shift in my mood before I could even say a word. She leaned in slightly, her tone gentle but firm. "Mason, you don't have to say anything you're not ready to. But if you need to talk, we're here." I hesitated, the weight of my secret pressing against my ribs like a vice. I had been holding it in for so long, trying to act like I was fine, like I could handle it on my own. But the truth was I couldn't. Not anymore. With a heavy sigh, I set my fork down, the clink of metal against porcelain cutting through the quiet. "It's Molly," I finally said, the words tumbling out like a confession. "She's been unfaithful. Not just once, multiple times." The air in the room seemed to shift. Gabriel froze, his fork paused in midair as disbelief flickered across his face. "Mason, I'm so sorry," he said, his voice low, heavy with sincerity. Rose reached across the table, her hand resting lightly on mine. "I can't imagine how painful this is for you," she murmured, her eyes filled with empathy. I swallowed hard, trying to steady myself, but the worst part was still to come. "It's worse than that," I continued, my voice trembling. "It's with Brad, my boss, and some of his friends, including his son." The words felt vile leaving my mouth, tainted with betrayal and humiliation. Gabriel's expression darkened at the mention of Brad's name. "Brad, I can't believe he'd do something so low." Rose leaned in closer, her voice even softer now. "Do you have anyone else you can talk to? A support system outside of us?" I shook my head, the isolation settling deeper in my chest. "Not really. That's part of why I came here. I needed to tell someone. Someone who might understand." Gabriel's jaw tightened, but when he spoke, his words carried a quiet resolve. "You have a place on my team, Mason. We'll get everything set up whenever you're ready. And if you need someone to talk to," Rose added, "whether it's professionally or just as a friend, I can help. You're not alone in this." Their support was a lifeline I hadn't even realized I needed. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again, even if just for a moment. The weight of everything hadn't disappeared, but it didn't feel quite so crushing anymore. There was a way forward. I just had to find the strength to take the next step. The evening wore on, and we discussed the logistics of the job, how to navigate the fallout of my marriage. The pain was still there, raw and unrelenting, but for the first time in a long time, there was a small ember of hope burning inside me. Maybe, just maybe, I could get through this. When I finally returned home, the house was dark and silent. Molly had already gone to bed, and the emptiness of the space felt suffocating. I stood in the living room for a long moment, taking in everything, the pictures on the walls, the memories woven into the fabric of our lives. I had once believed this was my forever. Now, it was nothing more than a place filled with ghosts. With a heavy sigh, I walked over to the futon, lay down, and stared up at the ceiling. The darkness around me felt like a reflection of the heaviness in my heart. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, painful decisions, and an uncertain future. But I had to face it, because staying in this nightmare wasn't an option anymore. I stood before Molly, my hands gripping the damning evidence of her betrayal. My voice was cold, cutting through the silence like a blade. "And these?" I asked, holding up the photos, the messages, the undeniable proof. "Brad's not the only one, Molly. His son, his friends, strangers I don't even know. Did they just walk all over you too, or did you willingly throw yourself into this mess?" Her face crumpled, tears spilling freely as she wrapped her arms around herself like they could shield her from the truth. I don't know how it got this far," she whispered, her voice raw with regret. "It started with Brad, but then it was like I couldn't stop. I felt trapped. Ashamed. I didn't know how to face you." "Trapped," I repeated, the word igniting a fire inside me, my frustration boiling over. "You weren't forced into this, Molly. You had choices. And every single one of them betrayed me. Betrayed us. You let it spiral out of control, and now you want to play the victim?" She sobbed, her hands clutching her face as if she could hide from what she had done. "I know I messed up, Mason. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I still love you." The words snapped something inside me. I slammed my hand against the table, the sharp crack of impact making her flinch. "Don't you dare say you love me," I hissed, my voice trembling with fury. "You don't destroy someone you love. You don't humiliate them. You don't ruin their trust and shatter their life." "Love?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You threw that word away the moment you chose Brad over me." She fell silent, her sobs the only sound in the room. A heavy pause stretched between us, thick with everything left unsaid. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling sharply as I forced myself to steady my tone. "This is over, Molly," I said, each word final, unshakable. "There's no fixing this. I'll file for divorce, and there's nothing left to discuss." Her head hung low, her voice barely audible. "What do you want me to do?" "You will pack your things and leave before the papers are served," I said. "You'll stay away from me, from my home, from my life. You wanted Brad and his circus? Congratulations. You're free to join them." Her shoulders shook as my words settled in. She nodded, her voice small, defeated. "I'll leave tomorrow." "Good," I muttered, rising to my feet. "The sooner, the better." Without another word, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her choices. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window as the enormity of it all hit me like a crashing wave. My marriage was over. My trust shattered. The woman I had once vowed to spend my life with had become a stranger to me. Yet, as the night stretched on, I felt something unexpected. A faint glimmer of relief. I had made my decision. I had taken control. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. Tomorrow, I would move forward. Without Molly. Without Brad. Without the weight of their betrayal. It was time to rebuild, on my terms. The fallout had been a storm of heartbreak and devastation, but as the dust settled, I found myself stepping into a new chapter. Molly's life had collapsed into chaos, dragging Brad and Matt down with her. Their web of deceit had destroyed more than just my marriage. It had cost lives. But as I stood at her memorial, watching the wind carry away the last echoes of what once was, I realized something profound. Forgiveness and letting go weren't for the other person. They were for me. They were the key to my own peace. Work at Empire became my anchor, giving me a sense of stability I hadn't felt in months. Gabriel was more than a boss. He became a mentor, guiding me as I carved out a new place for myself. Rose's counseling sessions helped me rediscover the parts of me I had lost along the way. I embraced fitness, took up martial arts, rekindled old hobbies. Bit by bit, I was finding my way back to myself. Then one evening, Tracy extended an invitation. "Happy hour with the team. You in?" she asked casually, her expression open, expectant. For a moment, I hesitated. Putting myself out there felt foreign, uncertain. But I knew staying stuck in the past wouldn't lead me to the life I wanted. So I said yes. Later that night at Hitchhikers, I found myself laughing, genuinely laughing, with Tracy and the team. No tension. No deceit. Just the simple joy of good company. Tracy and I shared more moments than I expected, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something warm flicker in my chest. Over the next few weeks, we spent more time together. It started with casual coffee breaks, team lunches, after-work drinks. But there was something about her warmth, her kindness, that drew me in. She never pried into my past, though I knew she was aware of it. She just treated me like Mason, a man she enjoyed getting to know. One evening, after we both stayed late at work, Tracy stopped by my desk, her eyes sparkling with a quiet confidence. "Want to grab dinner?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. I looked at her, feeling a small but undeniable shift inside me. "Yeah," I said, nodding. "I'd like that." As we walked out together, a realization settled over me. I was finally ready to open myself to new possibilities. Life had thrown me curveballs, knocked me down, shattered everything I once knew. But here I was, still standing, still moving forward. Tracy wasn't a replacement for Molly. She wasn't a bandage for my wounds. She was simply someone who made me feel hopeful again. And for now, that was enough.